Welcome to the What to Expect While Fostering and Adopting podcast show. If you're a foster mom, on the journey to adoption, already adopted, or somewhere in the middle, trying to figure out how to navigate the foster care system, wanting to grow your family through adoption, trying to balance everything, or stuck in that space of all things unknown, you're in the right place. What if there was a way to fast track your knowledge, prepare you for the good and the hard, and somebody who could answer that long list of questions I know you have? Hi friend, I'm Christine Marie, biblical mindset coach, adoptive mom, and previous foster parent of 77 children. Yep, you heard that right, 77 kiddos. I'm your host, and my goal is to help make your journey a lot easier by sharing my best tools, techniques, and skills that helped me pivot from foster care to adoption, fully surrender, and trust the process. I'm about to bring some calm to the chaos and show you how to navigate through this journey with a whole lot of grace. So go grab your cup of coffee and let's jump in. I am so excited to be here with you guys today. We have a very special guest on our podcast today, and I'm super excited for you to hear his testimony, his story, and how God is working through his life, and how adoption has not only touched him, but also his family and his children. And I really feel like you're going to hear a message of hope and transformation, a real testimony of heart posture through this episode today. So this is Steve Warmer. I want to make sure that I get all the details. He is a husband. He's a father of 3. Not only is he a speaker, a coach, an author, and a pastor, but he's also the executive director of a nonprofit called Hurt to Hope, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more towards the end of the podcast. Steve, thank you so much for stepping forward and saying, I want to share my story because your story is so amazing. Definitely tugged on my heartstrings. I think it's such a beautiful story of transformation and healing and truly hope, which I think goes back to your nonprofit. So I would love for you just to give us an overview, share your story with us so that our listeners can hear a little bit more about you.
Christine, thank you so much for having me today. It's my honor to be with you. I'm thinking of that story that you just described for me to tell. And I would say, just for starters, growing up, I, like a lot of teenagers, that pre-teen age to teenage years, high school through college, even for me into young adulthood, had a lot of unprocessed emotions. I would say a lot of anger because of some broken family situations in my young life. A lot of anger, a lot of unforgiveness, a lot of bitterness, some anxieties, a trail of broken relationships. That would describe my youth. It wasn't all bad. I was taken care of. I was provided for. I had fun when I wasn't in my own way. Maybe I had too much fun times because I didn't know the Lord yet. That would come later on. But yeah, those early years had quite a bit of angst to them. Some of it out of my control, but I certainly didn't make things better with the poor choices that I'd made. So I'll kind of come up for air and we can go from there.
So tell us a little bit more. So something that was really impactful to me is that you were adopted as well, right?
Yeah, a little bit different way. My mother was a single mom with me for about 5 years, and then she met somebody during that 5 years, and they started dating, and then he eventually got a job out of state. While he was out of state, he proposed to my mom, and then obviously it was just she and I at that time. So we moved from one state to another, and I'll try to keep it brief, but let's just say that my biological father at that time wasn't meeting his responsibilities. I would say both as a father and emotionally, supportively, but also financially, he wasn't doing his role. And so, long story short, they both asked me if that I would like to be adopted by him, which I said yes. I think I was 7 or 8 years old at the time. So not your traditional adoption, so to speak,
Yeah.
but I've come to learn I don't know how many of them are traditional the more I look into it.
Right. Well, and then tell me more about and you're married. How many years have you been married?
It'll be 29 this summer.
Okay, that's awesome. How did you and your wife end up adopting? And can you tell us more about that story?
Yeah, that'll take a minute. Even the Cliff Notes version of that takes a
Yeah.
minute. put on your seatbelts because this one's a crazy ride. So like a lot of young couples, we had a dream of, I guess you could say, the American dream of doing well in business and having that house in the burbs and a white picket fence with a couple of kids and maybe a dog or two. That was our dream. We had a goal of having a couple of kids, and unfortunately, in our first, I think it was our first 6 years of marriage, we had 5 miscarriages.
Wow.
And looking back on that now, I was very young and immature. I still had those unprocessed emotions that I was telling you about. My wife, Rebecca, was a great influence on me in helping me to process things in a more mature way, always be having a calming influence on me. But I just had a lot to learn, and that was tough for me because those were a shared goal that we had.
Right.
But I'm thinking back now, how much, if I was more mature, how better of a husband could I have been if I'm going through it, how much harder that was for her being the mother, the potential mother. But it was really devastating, and we just kinda tabled that for a while, and there's a lot more to it, but we became Christians a couple years after the last miscarriage, and we started praying about adoption. "God, do you want us to start our family that way?" And typical of who God is, he presented us with some things that made us realize, okay, he does want us to pursue it this way, and that began a 5-year adoption journey where you go through the home studies, the foster care classes. You have your, what do they call it, your portfolio that you get together for potential birth mothers, the home study,
Right.
all those things. And we were picked very early on in that process. I mean, I would say 60 days after we had everything in that portfolio ready, by a mother that was 7 months pregnant. She lived about an hour away, and we hit it off really quickly with her and with her mother and her family, and she allowed us to name the baby early on. And, through a series of events, when we arrived at the hospital, a couple months later, it was incredible because I had never been in a delivery room before, and actually, I wasn't there when the baby was born, but there was an understanding that I would be the first one to hold the baby, so they had to come get me.
Mm.
And boy, I'll never forget that scene of what the delivery room looked like that, but I'll spare that for this talk.
Yeah.
It, it was a blessing, but it was like, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming too at the same time.
Right.
Um, but she changed her mind an hour before we were to go home with the baby girl. And like I said, this is about an hour away, and about an hour away, going on at the same time, was our church having an outdoor service making the announcement that we were getting ready to come home with our
Oh,
child, because the church had been praying for this, for so long for us, but it wasn't meant to be. And as crazy as it sounds, that actually, that couple of days and that day specifically, I think Rebecca and I had never felt closer to the Lord, even in our disappointment. He was so present, he was so comforting, so giving us that peace that surpasses understanding. It was actually quite remarkable.
how many days was it after the baby was born that you found this out?
Oh, that mom changed her mind?
Yeah,
Th
2. Ugh.
Yeah, she was born on a Friday. This was a Sunday late morning where we found
Oh,
out.
so 5 miscarriages, 5 years of waiting.
5 miscarriages.
Uh-huh.
What I just described to you, and there's a whole lot more to the story,
Right.
but that was the first of 6 failed adoptions. Keep in mind, this adoption was in year 1 of a 5-year process. So there was still 5 more, I'll give you the air quotes, right? Failed adoptions to come. So as devastating as that was, we were just getting warmed up, so to speak.
Oh, I don't know that most people would have it in them to continue on. And I know a lot of I get messages from people all the time who, are having their first foster child that they have fallen in love with return to their parent or maybe transition to family. But You went through 6 potentials.
The foster parents are my heroes. When we were looking at this situation, of course, you have to go through the foster training to
Right.
become an adoptive parent, but we said to ourselves, "These guys are amazing," because the
Yeah.
people we were in classes with, they had experienced, just like you said, 4, 5, 6, 10, that go back to the birth parents, and we're like, "Gosh, I don't know if we're strong enough to do that." And we were when we started that process, yeah, we were in our late 30s. So we were like, we just want to start our family, and we were just praying for one child. So that was our goal. But yeah, the foster parents are heroes to us. I guess if you could say there was a blessing, certainly as hard as that situation was, the other ones were a little less intense,
Mhm.
and we're not connecting on a deep level with the child yet like a foster parent does. So I think that's the differentiation,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Well, and it's interesting because a lot of people go into the foster care system or go to the foster care system, even. And I think what most people don't understand is that private adoption agencies, the children that they are looking to place with families, if the child is already born, they're coming most likely from the foster care system. We fostered 77 kiddos. And in addition to our 2 daughters, there were only, I think, 2 to 3 more that became available for adoption. So if you do the math on that, it's not a high percentage of kiddos. So, like you're saying, a lot of these foster parents have so much heartbreak, but they feel led that God is calling them to adopt. And so they just continue on, continuing on. So, okay, tell us more. What came next?
And I will say, as a humorous note, they tell you, and I know you know this, like when you go through your foster care classes, they don't be surprised if that first call is not from a large sibling group of 6, and it's at 2 in the morning, and you don't have to take it, but don't be surprised if that happens. And sure enough, the first call we got was just like that. We're like, wait a minute, we just got this small house and a couple of extra beds.
Yeah.
But yeah, to your point, there is such a need for foster parents. It's amazing. I mean, so like I was saying, we went on to have 5 other situations that didn't work out, and then eventually, I think it was after year 4, we were communicated with by our adoption agency, and they said, we're they really didn't give an explanation. They said, "We're gonna move on and take you guys off the list of our prospective parents."
Oh,
We're not sure entirely why it was. I mean, we have a theory that maybe at that point we had crossed over the 40-year-old threshold, and maybe, they're not gonna say that obviously, but so we know all about, the traditional adoption agencies and how that works. But I will say that when that happened, I remember calling my wife because they called me while I was at work, and I said, "Okay, so we're going into year 5. And now we don't have an adoption agency. We don't I mean, it's like not even starting over, it's before starting over. It's like you haven't even started the homework yet."
right.
And I remember saying to her, only God can change the situation." And it really as devastating as it was to kinda start over, it changed our prayers because we're like, "Okay, are we giving up? No, we still believe this is gonna happen." Why? Number 1, because he's put it on our heart. Number 2, and I don't think this statistic has changed a whole lot over the years. I think at that time there was 153 orphans in the world. So we know God wants to align them with Christian households. And so we're like, "You know what? We went from pray, pray, pray," which we kept doing like the persistent widow, to, "Okay, God, if this isn't meant to be, shut the door." And every time we pray that, another situation would come up.
Mm,
And yeah, it wasn't the one, but that was his way of saying, "Keep going."
mm,
And when we got into that year 5 and the adoption agency parted ways with us, like a snap of the finger, I mean, it was like 72 hours, we were told about another situation. It didn't work out either, but what God was doing was he kept giving us shots of encouragement to keep going. He was sustaining us through this long journey. And then, to get to the climax of the story, he gave us 3 at one time. He gave us 3
Wow.
kids at one time, and there's some moving pieces to that. I mean, the 2 of them were and still are obviously full-blooded siblings, and then another situation was a baby, and all these situations came from people that the older 2 were being fostered by a couple in our church, and then the baby, we were meeting with the mom, before she gave birth, and she's like, "I'm probably gonna try to parent, but if I don't, I'm gonna seriously consider you guys." So they're all connected to relationships we had in the church in one form or another, but I'm telling you, when they came into our house, they were 4, I think 2.5 and 1 month old, and they did come, like, within 48 hours of each other, so, all sense and purposes at the same time.
Right, right. It just makes me think of pray without ceasing.
Mhm.
And are you going to continue to pray? Will you continue? I mean, God placed it on both of your hearts to adopt. If you look at, I mean, I'm just writing down some of these numbers going, are you kidding me? It's just, you could easily say all the odds were stacked against you. Maybe people would say, maybe it's just not meant to be. Maybe it's just not meant for you. Then you prayed those, I like to call them dangerous prayers, where it's remove this from our life if this is your plan, or remove this person, remove this thing. And you're like, but please don't actually take it. But if he does, then you're telling him we're going to have peace about it. But he didn't take it. He tripled the blessing.
That evokes so many thoughts, Christine. I'm thinking of the second situation where the child, I think, was 2 years old, had some medical issues, but we were willing to do it. The agency was supposed to give us we requested the medical records, and it was a very tough decision for me. My wife was a little more surrendered about it than I was. I was really struggling with it, and the adoption agency never did get us the medical records. That was the only thing we asked. We met with the mom and the child twice, and it was a good fit. And I remember, like, I had to make a decision by the next morning, and I remember going outside. It was like it seems like it was late October. It was kinda cold outside, and I just dropped to my knees. Stars were out, clear night. I said, "God, I'm battling here. Are you asking us without the medical report? Are you asking us to take a leap of faith?" I said, "Whatever you want, God. I'm struggling here. I'm really
Yeah.
wrestling here. But if you want me to do it, I'm in." And I got up off my knees and I was surrendered. We're good. We called the adoption agency the next morning, told them we were in. They said, "No, you've waited too long." I'm like, "You said by this time tomorrow." I've beat that time by 2 hours. And looking back now, it was just God testing to see if we're willing to do it. It wasn't his will that it be that child, but he was testing our resolve. And then, to your point about, giving up, it just wasn't in our DNA. I was just telling the church a couple weeks ago. I said, "I don't know about you guys. I only know one way, and that's pray like the persistent widow, and that's
Mhm.
not to give up." And he'll show you when it's not his will. He'll shut those doors, but until he slams it shut, I'm gonna be like the persistent widow. And
Mhm.
so that's why we never gave up, because he never said no.
It's interesting, it makes me somebody had asked me a long time ago, "How do you know when it's God's plan?" And I said, "It just flows." And when it's not God's plan, it's roadblock, and I said, "But I can go around those roadblocks. Like, I can make it around, but it's an intentional roadblock that I can recognize." And sometimes I go around it, and then there's another roadblock, and it's like,
Mhm,
I could go around that too, and sometimes I have, and then you end up in a whole disaster of a situation, but you're like, "No, I did this. I definitely did this. God tried to stop me." But I feel like that's the thing is that it's so amazing that he's just looking for your surrender, your obedience, your willingness to say, "Yes, I will," but he still provides that protection.
there were so many chances to obey, and I'm sure we weren't perfect at it. That's why it took so long. But yeah, I agree with you totally.
Well, and it's amazing, had anything else gone any different way, you wouldn't have the 3 children that you have now. Talk to us a little bit about that. You don't have to get into the details, but, like, was that easier? Did it just flow? Were there a lot of complications? Tell us more about that.
Well, when you say easier, do you mean 3 specifically? Or
just like the process, because you guys had bump after bump after bump and so much just like trying to push a boulder up a hill to adopt your children.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't easy. I mean, the joke that we always used was a basketball analogy. It was like we never got to play man-to-man defense. It went from being just the 2 of us to 5 of us, 3 kids. We we had to go
Yeah.
to zone defense right away to keep up with the 3 kids.
Yeah.
But it was our heart's desire. See, that's why I think it was from God. It was like he gives you the desires of your heart, Psalm 37, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, and I gotta tell you too, we faced opposition, not just from the enemy, of course, but I mean, we had people that were friends that were believers like, "Well, you guys don't make enough money. Or you sure you can take on 3? Maybe just 1, maybe just the 2." Because it was very we were like, "Is it these 2? Is it this 1?" Because it was kind of up and down with the whole
Right.
process. And we would look at each other occasionally, like over dinner or whatever, and we're like, "Wait a minute. Whoa, whoa, whoa. No, is God trying to do n no." Yeah, he was. He made it clear. But we were so delighted. I mean, I tell the story all the time. Some guys make fun of me. Like I had a Dodge Ram, 1,500 pickup truck, half-ton pickup truck. I'm like, okay, that's not logical anymore. So, traded it in for the minivan. And yeah,
Right.
I didn't care that I traded it in for a minivan because that's what we needed for our family. But, it's not it's thrilling, fulfilling, it increases your faith, but it's a lot of hard work too. And then, when you're talking about adopted children, and I know you know this, like, they come from hurt places,
Right.
and they have memories. Even I forgot the term of it right now, but even the memories that they have while they're inside the womb.
Yes.
And that carries on. It affects their behavior to where somebody from the outside is like, "Why are they acting like that? You need to get a grip on your children, or you need to be stricter," or whatever, term they're using. Like, all due respect to those folks, they don't know what they don't know. And of course, we're learning from, the ground running.
Right.
What do these children need in us to give them the most stable household possible? So yeah, it was certainly a journey.
It was interesting, I heard something the other day when we were at a doctor's appointment with my daughter, and my daughter was born, I think, at 28, 29 weeks, and we were talking about some of, like, questioning different hormone tests and all different kinds of stuff we need to have done, and I was talking to the doctor about, "What about this? What about this?" And he was talking about how even when a mother is pregnant and the baby's in utero, and let's say the mother doesn't want that child or doesn't want that birth, the mother produces certain, like, heightened hormones that are released throughout her body in times of stress or, all different things, and all of those are part of the creation of the child because that excess of hormones that are pulsing through her body are part of the duplicated cells in this child.
Wow. I don't think I've ever heard that before. That is bizarre.
But if you think about it though, right? If a mom's in a stressful, maybe a domestic violence, or maybe they're using, or maybe they're without any resources and they're homeless and living on the streets, they could even be in fight or flight the whole time and they have
Mhm.
this cortisol and different hormones rushing through their body at these major levels that, I mean, our body is meant to get us out of a scary situation of a bear chasing us, right? But that might be
Yeah.
another human chasing you. Or, I mean, it's just when we look at these children who have been a part of the foster care system, these aren't ordinary circumstances. Like, I'm challenged with the water bill being late. These are generational, it says in the Bible, the sins of the father, right? But how does that mutate down to the point where a child is not able to stay with their biological parent? It's a big jump, and it didn't just happen overnight. It happened a little bit each generation, or maybe certain circumstances. But then you think, well, in order for this to happen to this person, they must have had some hard things in their life.
Mhm.
And so it's interesting you start thinking about all of the multiplication of DNA. I mean, a baby starts with one cell, right? Two cells. And then it multiplies millions of times or however many times it multiplies. But if it's not in that optimal environment, things can go awry. And people don't see that piece. They just see the child that's right there in front of them.
Yeah.
And maybe they're drawing on the couch in the church lobby with a marker.
Yep.
And or they're climbing on the pews and jumping off and crashing into the floor, right? And they're like,
Mhm.
"What is wrong with this child? Their parents must not keep a tight rein on them." And then, I mean, for us, and I know I'm deviating, but, for us, some of the kiddos that we took were such high needs, and the judgment was so intense that we just stopped going to church
Mm,
because it wasn't because people were judging us, but we were worried that they were judging the child,
mm.
and there wasn't really an environment for the child to really be safe, right? And it's just hard. So then how do people wander away from the church? I could see a whole bunch of different ways, but I think just a lot of grace, right? And if the child is acting hyper or unfiltered, you know, realizing and just a message, and I'm sure all the adoptive parents and foster parents listening to this are like, yes and amen. Like, you know, sometimes these children just have to get out what they don't even know is inside.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad when that happens in the church for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, what you would hope for is a level of maturity, and you can find it, but you
You
want a
Yes.
collective mature body of believers that have a heart to want to understand. And you and I've talked before, so but it's asking questions, not to judge, but how can I better support you? And that's how we do it, is get some time away from church over lunch or coffee or whatever. And hey, I want to support you. God's blessed you with these beautiful children. How can I be an asset? How can I be a friend? How can I better support you when you're trying to be the best mom you can be for these children? That's what you hope for. And you might find it here and there in the
Right.
church if you're lucky, but you often have to search for other communities to find that. And quite frankly, they're there, but they're hard to find sometimes.
Let's get back to your 3 kiddos. What was that like transitioning from, like, no kiddos and to 3? And then how long did it take between when you had the placement of them and when they were adopted?
So in Tennessee, you have to wait 6 months until you have their final court appearance.
Okay.
So that's why the need for the foster care classes, because even though the understanding by everybody is adoption's the final goal, in that 6-month process, you are technically fostering them until your court date. So that's the answer on that. As far as the emotions go with that and the reality with it, like I said, it was a lot of work, but when it's your heart's desire, it's a labor of love, right? Like
Mhm.
I used to have a job when we first got them where I would leave at 5:45 in the morning, but I just volunteered, "You know what? I'm gonna take the 2 o'clock feeding of the baby."
Oh,
And yeah, some nights that was harder than others, but I treasure that time because I view that as when we were praying for one child, certainly I think back to those years where we had the miscarriages back in the late '90s. We were hoping for a child of our own, a baby, if you will. And so I wasn't gonna, look down on having to get my child up at 2 in the morning and feed him. I mean, there was great bonding that was going on during that time.
right.
And then, taking the 3 to the park and having a blast, or going to get bales of the hay in my truck before we got the minivan, and the kids jumping off the bales of hay
Yeah.
into my arms, and going to see Santa Claus at the mall, with them. I mean, I wouldn't trade those memories for anything. So yeah, it was great, but a lot of hard work goes into it too, for sure.
So what would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned through the whole journey from the day you said, "Let's start building our family," to your wife, to the day the adoption was finalized for your kiddos?
Phew, what's the one thing that I've learned? Well, it may be an obvious answer, but each child is different, each person is different, and you may have rules in your house and practices in your house for the good of the whole household, but when trying to teach the heart, you have to meet each child where they're at. Because
Mm,
like my 3 kids, even though 2 of them are full siblings, their experiences and their recollections are even different. So the wiring of the brain is even slightly different in those 2. And so you have to keep all that in mind, not to give too technical of an answer, but
yeah.
when I'm trying to teach a lesson or correct a behavior, I have to keep in mind the whole history of the child, the whole backstory of the child and how they're wired and their experiences in trying to get their heart to be as godly as possible. I hope that makes sense.
Yes. There's no it's funny because there's all those parenting books, I think you can pick them up, like how to parent your 2-year-old or your 3-year-old, and I feel like foster care and adoption just flip all of those on their head.
Mhm.
There's no cookie cutter approach, which I know there's not really a yes, a cookie cutter approach to any child, like, every child's different, but when you introduce trauma to the child, it's you have to really and I love how you said that, you just need to look at their heart and where their heart's at, and their chronological age might not match with their emotional age or even what their heart set is or even their physical impulses, like, everything's different. So let me ask you this, now that you have adopted 3, do you and your wife feel like our family's complete? Did you ever get that feeling?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. These are God's children first, and He moved mountains to make it clear that that was our daughter and 2 sons. No doubt about it.
It's amazing. So what would you say to that parent who's listening to this who has not found their child yet?
First thing I would say is keep the faith. Not all journeys are as long as ours. We've had people we've had people ask us, "Do you wanna talk about your journey?" "Well, yeah, I wanna praise God, but I don't wanna deter anybody from adopting either." I think I have to take it back full circle to if God's put that desire in your heart and you've been praying about it, you've been getting advice about it, and the spouses are on the same page, they're unified in their desire to move forward, there will always be more children available to adopt. Don't give up. Don't give up, especially if you're not able to have children biologically. These children need you, and they need you to not give up on the journey, but you're gonna find once you're their mom and dad, they need you to not give up on them in all the
Mhm.
hard places that they're trying to overcome too.
Wow. I love how you said that because it's a journey to get there. And then that's truly where the journey begins.
It's so much work, but if you're in that place of praying about it right now, it's likely gonna be one of your highest life's calling to help those children that come from difficult places, and they need what you have to offer them.
Well, and I think also it's so important to not get stuck in that place of fear. I mean, did you guys ever struggle with should we have taken that child? Should we have not taken that child? Or did you have peace?
Are you talking about the 3 or earlier?
Or before the 3?
Oh, you talking about the one that changed her mind?
Yeah.
That child ended up back in our home for 6 months,
Oh, okay.
and it was during that time that I really wrestled with God, like, "God, what are you doing? Are you trying to make was her decision wrong? Was this your will all along? Are you trying to make it right now?" I remember we would have lunch with her once in a while, and we're in custody of her child, and I'd be looking at her hold her child, and I'd be like my heart wasn't in the right place. I was like, "No, I think God's given us your child. That's supposed to be my girl." I remember somebody said to us, "Did it ever occur to you you're just supposed to serve that child and that family for the next several months?" Yeah, I don't wanna hear that. No, no, but it evolved to where, yeah, that's what we're doing. We're just taking care of that child. Do we ever regret it? No. I mean, I think, yeah, certainly there was an emotional tug of war for the first few months, but it goes back to your question about the 3 that we have now. Total contentment. Totally see that was God's will of just maturing us in that process, and really, he was increasing our faith for what was to
Mm.
come.
That's so beautiful, and I love how how you shared that piece because I feel like it's really easy, and I've, talked about this on the show, that it's so easy to get into that place of, like, judgment to the birth parent because it's like, well, how could you if that was supposed to be your child, how could you let all of this happen? Like, if they were my child, I would never put them in that situation, but that's the piece where God's just refining our heart because he has something prepared for us that he needs us. Reminds me of the Samaritan
Mm,
who helped the person on the side of the road. It wasn't the easy thing to do. You didn't do the easy thing. You pushed through the hard and you helped somebody who needed help, and it was all just preparation for where you're at now, which I appreciate you sharing that because it's just such a real emotion. It's amazing. So, okay, tell us a little bit more about the book because I know you're an author. So tell us a little bit more about your book and how people can access that book and whatnot.
yeah, the book's kind of a funny story. I started doing an outline based on some of the things we've talked about today, just time frames and, "Oh my gosh, God did this and he did that," and it's like, "You know what? I wanna praise God with this story," and so I started writing an outline for it, back in 2011 and 12 when it was all fresh. And then life got busy, right? Raising 3 kids, and then we went into we didn't even get into it. We went into the ministry the next weekend after we got the kids. We've been praying about that too. It's like God, rains down blessings all at one time. But I've got a coach that I've been working with for years, and a couple of years ago, he said to me, "You still got that book in you. When you're gonna write that book?" And I'm just that guy that's wired a little different. Like I told my coach, I said, "I'm not paying you to talk about that today. This is what we're going to talk about." But when we got off the call, it bothered me that I hadn't done it yet. So the spirit kind of used, he's a believer also. The spirit kind of used him to nudge me. I got off that call with him and wrote that book in 3 weeks. Now,
Wow.
there was a lot to learn about editing and publishing and all that, but really, at the end of the day, the adoption journey is probably 50 to 60% of that book, and it's called Rivers of Hope, and it's a public thank you to God from me, just telling him thank you for all the ways that he's blessed me. It's got some other cool stories in there of things that he's done in my life. I just wanted to thank him, and I did it publicly through the book, so that's how that came about.
What a blessing. And if you don't mind, I know you're an executive director for a nonprofit called Hurt to Hope. And so I would love it if you could just share a little bit about that, if you're willing.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you were asking me earlier about, the beginning, and I was describing some of my childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, and I was talking specifically about unprocessed emotions. I use that verbiage on purpose because that's what we do in Hurt to Hope. We have a faith-based workshop that helps people with their unprocessed emotions. A lot of the same ones: anxiety, relationship challenges, unforgiveness, bitterness. And usually what we find is people have either freshly have had a relationship challenge or they've had one that's kind of been a thorn in their side all their life. And it's usually a spouse or an ex-spouse, a sibling, but more often than not, it's mom or dad. And so we help them to heal from those unprocessed emotions, and we do it in a faith-based way. And what's been really, really cool is we've done it for several years in person. We learned how to do it virtually like everybody else in 2020 during COVID. But what's really been exciting is we're working on a digital course. So that workshop will be available concisely with anybody that's got an internet connection, a computer, electronic device. It's going to be able to come to you probably in the next 60 to 90 days. It'll be final. So we're really, really excited about that. It's helping a lot of people.
That's awesome. Well, as soon as that does become digitally available, get back to me and update me, and then we can put that in the show notes. So stay tuned. That should be available in the show notes once that is available. But I just want to say thank you for being on here today, Steve. Thank you for sharing your story. I imagine there's so many people who are in waiting. And every single moment that you spend waiting, your story is just proof that it's not for nothing. It's all preparation. Like every moment is preparing us for what God has planned for us. I love that you were able to adopt your 3 children and that it gave you that sense of completeness, because I know that's where, when people want children, they're looking to fill that void, that place that they want fulfilled. And you're so driven and so faithful and God is so faithful to just, you just followed his leading and continued to lean into him, even when it was so hard. And even when in those moments when you fell down on the ground and said, okay, we'll just say yes. And God still showed up. And so I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show today. And I'm excited to see how many people you're going to help impact just by sharing your journey.
Well, thank you. And I would like to say to your audience as we leave, hang in there. Don't give up. Don't lose hope. I thank you, Christine, for having me. It's been great.
Hey friend, I hope that you loved today's episode. I pray it blessed you and helped you see that you have a friend in your corner who truly understands what you're walking through. If so, would you share this episode with someone who's been praying for a breakthrough in their own journey? It would also bless me big time and help others to find this podcast if you would leave a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also submit your questions, topics that you would like covered, and find a community of like-minded mamas in my private Facebook group by searching What to Expect While Fostering and Adopting on Facebook. See you next time.